It is indeed a pleasure to welcome you to this presentation of 1854, a folk opera. We wish to acknowledge and thank Susanna Sturgis for her authorship of the script for 1854. Ms. Sturgis considers her play to be a work in progress, and she will welcome comments from audience members and participants. As you know, that this is a historic piece. It tells a true story. Of course, we've added a little color with some additional characters, but the tenor and spirit of this script is based on factual history in Martha's Vineyard. We wish to pause a moment to give heartfelt sympathy and condolences to the Jennifer Schillings family on the passing of her father in Philadelphia. And that's important to us because her son, Roger Schilling Jr., was to have played the role of Henry. Since he is not here, we have a wonderful stand-in in the presence of Claire Gantz. She will play that role, but as Henrietta. We wish to also acknowledge that we found, you know how sometimes whatever you try and you read and you miss something on the very first page, we have a word that we needed to have corrected, but I think we did that. So we look at tonight's cast, and we're all volunteers. A few actors, but most of us are just plain folk who believe in sharing the history of our nation. If you look in your programs on page 26, we invite you for some audience participation. I know sometimes when I go places, I like to sing along if I know the song. So we invite you to sing along because throughout the presentation, the Freedom Choir will be singing. Now we invite you to sing along, and we invite you not to become a soloist. Did everyone get that? Okay. We are so happy that you're here, and we want you to enjoy every moment and listen carefully. I have one special note. I have a gentleman in our cast who we call him 3-in-1. And I'll let you look at your cast of characters and find out who he is, for he truly does play 3 different characterizations in this presentation, and I want you to discover that for yourselves. And we want to acknowledge the painting of Frederick Douglass, as also noted in your program, but it is such a lovely work that we thought we would share it for this historic moment. And I think you're going to hear the word historic a lot in the play, so listen for that word, historic. And you are here for an historic event. Thank you for coming.
bountiful vineyard, all you who have gathered here to join us in our honoring of those past islanders who at a time of reckoning themselves gathered to deliberate on their fate and whether to oppose a growing power in the Congress of the United States. The southern states had a coalition which shut down all debate in Congress for abolition. Therefore, we join together tonight. Their heinous coalition had shut down in Congress all debates on regional rights for total abolition, growing more profuse in northern states, where slavery was seen by growing numbers as an unholy abomination, and sentiment was tipping toward righteous emancipation. Listen, dear guests, to our story of one special moment of vineyard glory enhanced by the power and genius of slave songs. Created as a code by souls mostly unknown who triumphed over those who were the worst that man can be, and gave us their dreams and their encrypted history through soul's sweet art of musical panoply. Slaves with no choice, no voice, no place to belong, have given us the brilliance and the beauty and disguised messages in their slave songs.
If we get caught, Master Sheriff's gonna tie on my hide.
Henrietta and Prudence, Miss Prudence, we're not gonna get caught. Besides, Mama says this meeting is gonna be historic. I've never seen anything historic.
Who cares about historic when you can't sit down?
Did Mr. Frederick Douglass worry about that when he ran away from his nasty masters?
I'm not Mr. Douglass.
Oh, ma'am. We're so sorry, ma'am. We didn't see you sitting there.
They don't see me now, but they will soon. And I will be remembered after all of them have been forgotten.
You won't tell anyone you saw us, will you, please?
If no one asks, I won't tell. None will ask. I see them, but they pass me on the street, and they see me not. When charms they need, or healing herbs, or foresight, then they come to see me.
This is from Bedford and Boston before that. There, our brothers have organized an anti-man-hunting league in response to the disgraceful treatment of Anthony Burns last spring.
Did you hear it? Yes. Anthony Burns was on his way to work when he was kidnapped off the street and charged with being a fugitive.
Which he was, brave man, and under the laws of our Commonwealth, he was a free man once he set foot on its soil. But our slave laws have been trampled by the slaveholders in Congress. Mr. Dana and Mrs. Morris defended him in court, but under this foul fugitive slave law, those who seek liberty from bondage have no legal rights. And so it was ordered that Mr. Burns be returned to Virginia in a life of servitude. Valiant abolitionists, both black and white, tried to free Mr. Burns from the courtroom, but they were unsuccessful.
This case has woken many from complacency.
This fellow that escaped the Franklin at Holmes Hall earlier this week, have you heard anything?
Only rumors. He's not been taken yet, thank God.
What is there news?
Not since yesterday dusk, when our brother departed Christiantown, I await word from my young cousin George,
May God guide their steps.
and confound their pursuers.
Indeed.
My pleasure, ma'am.
Mr. Marchand, your vineyard gazette is doing very well. You must find our island very quiet after your years in New York.
So much is happening in that quiet. New York is like the crashing of waves during a northeast gale. Much goes unnoticed in that din.
The Lord on high is mightier than the noise of many waters, yea, than the mighty waves of the sea. Reverend Vincent is very fond of that verse. Have you heard him preach, Mr. Marchand? He is so eloquent on the moral necessity of abolition.
I hope he does not seek to excite his listeners with hatred of our Southern brethren. Some of these abolitionists are reckless with their rhetoric.
The good Reverend often reminds us to judge not, that ye be not judged. He urges us to pray for the slaveholder as well as the slave, that they may come to see that no man should be treated like a beast.
So, Mr. Prescott, do you favor the petition we're gathering here to consider?
I don't favor or disfavor. I come to hear the arguments for and against. Mostly though, I come because my wife and I are part second.
That I did. Reverend Vincent preaches most eloquently on the evils of slavery, and I have been reading to my older students, including my daughter Prudence, from the narrative of Frederick Douglass. I intend to report back to them. So you see, you are not the only one here who has brought a notebook and pen.
I also thought it best my wife not come alone. Civilized men have come to blows when this subject comes up.
I do believe you are more interested than you let on. The Southerners in Congress have declared they won't even consider any petitions about slavery or abolition. They vowed to put them aside unread. Surely this violates both the letter and the spirit of our Constitution. So several good citizens of Edgartown have written to ask our legislatures to protest this resolution. This meeting is to discuss the issue further and see who agrees.
We Vineyard do enjoy our discussion, don't we? Thank you for your time. Mr. Norton, what brings you to this meeting, if you don't mind my asking?
I most certainly do mind. Your so-called newspaper has twisted my words and made a fool of me before God, man, and the entire island. I will not subject myself to such treatment again.
In the year of our Lord, 1849, our Mr. Norton did petition the great and general court of this Commonwealth for the right to own and sell slaves, even though Massachusetts abolished slavery in 1783.
Is that so?
He needed some help running his farm, he said.
Who doesn't need help at times? Let him hire hands as their wage or orders or the help he needs.
In that year, there were few hands to be hired. Gold fever took hold, and off went all our strong young men, seeking their fortune in California.
And back they came soon enough. Most of them older and poorer than when they left.
Sure enough, for whatever his reasons, good Mr. Norton made a fool of himself without Mr. Marchand's assistance. And now in Boston, they poke fun at the bumpkins and rustics of Martha's Vineyard.
I beg your pardon.
They do indeed. My point is, sir, is that if you are thought a fool, it is not through Mr. Marchand's doing. If a man's farm is too large to manage with family and the fairly compensated labor of free men, perhaps he should sell off or lease some of his acreage to others.
And who are you to be meddling in my business? What does a university man like yourself know of farming?
Gentlemen, I remind you that there are ladies present. If you must quarrel, please do it outside.
I did fear Mr. Norton was going to strike Mr. Butler just now.
I was right.
Mr. Butler, I do believe I know what brings you here, but perhaps you will tell me in your own words.
Certainly. Since the passage of the Fugitive Slave Act 4 years ago, the slave catchers and bounty hunters have had free rein to go about their loathsome business throughout the North and in our Commonwealth. Worse, our citizens and officials have been threatened with $1,000 fines and time in jail if we refuse to assist them. So I and Silas Luce and several other men of Edgartown have sent a memorial to our state legislature asking that they demand this resolution be immediately rescinded. We are gathered here today to see if more of our citizens will support it and show the people of Boston that we are not the bumpkins and rustics that some think us.
Thank you.
You are most welcome. And I have brought to this meeting my house guest, Mrs. Lucretia Mott, the noted abolitionist. Would you and your wife kindly join us for dinner tomorrow night?
It would be our pleasure, sir.
Excellent. And now I must attend my guest, if you will excuse me.
Is that truly Mrs. Mott? She's a famous speaker for women's rights and abolitionism.
What news? News? What news?
Reverend, have you met my young cousin George? George is a seaman by trade and known to all in Holmes Cove Harbor and Everytown as well.
The sheriff's men have found the Franklin missing boat at West Tasman Shore. Our friend, I hear, is well away and making for.
Well done, lad.
It must be the sheriff's men.
It's the sheriff himself.
sheriff is here, his own self. I'm in for it now. Shh, if we're quiet, no one will know we're here. Who is that lady? Have you ever seen her before? Never in my life. She must be from off.
I am a teller of stories, a singer of songs, original being words. I sing children to sleep, I sing people awake. I sing mourning and hope and jubilation. The past sings to us, we sing to the future. To those who hear, the future sings to us. We are singing a new story. Every person here has brought a story. Here, their stories will braid together and become something new. Each woman and man will leave this place altered, bearing a story both strange and familiar. And so will you. Sheriff Coffin brings the story. But the story began before he became a part of it. A child was born. Perhaps in Alabama, perhaps in Carolina. His parents were both free, or perhaps his mother was a slave. His life was tolerable, or better than tolerable, until it was tolerable no longer. Then he stowed away on the northbound schooner Franklin, which now rests at anchor in Holmes Hole. Then his story is unfolding as you sit here in your seats. It will braid itself into your own stories. Remember this, that the story began before this child was born, and not in Alabama or Carolina or anywhere else on these banks of the wide river. It began on the farther banks in Africa, with men, women, and children captured and brought to the Americas against their will. You, both of you, are part of the story. You will carry it into the future.
What does she mean by that? I don't know.
If he sings us a song from the sea?
No, that's fine. Captain John.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We have many songs that we sing at sea, some of which are probably not appropriate. But I can say, acknowledging that in this cause there's great work to be done, so I chose to sing what we call a shanty, which is a sea song, and it's a work song. And the key of the shanty is call and repeat. So I, as the caller, am the shanty man, and we'd like you to join us as the sailors, so you all can heave together. The words that you'll be singing, for the first part, I'll sing a line, and it's heave away, haul away. Want to try that? Heave away, haul away. Yanking on the lines of the ship. And the second one is as we take off, we're bound for South Australia. I've been so many places. So we're bound for South Australia. Can you do that? Now the song part of it is heave away. Can I get that? No. Heave away, haul away. Heave away, haul away. Sound like sailors. And we're bound for South Australia. We're bound for South Australia. The ship will be leaving in a half an hour, I expect. So I'll go now. And it's a song from right over the way, Cape Cod. Can I get that again, sir? Cape Cod boys ain't got no sled. Heave away, haul away. Go down the Came around from South Australia. They've got girls, they've got no hills. Lead the way, all the way. They get the doctor, gives them codfish pills. Came around from South Australia. Cape Cod girls, they've got no comb. Lead the way, all the way. They comb their hair with the codfish bones. Never mind for South Australia. Thank you very much, sir.
Sheriff Coffin brings word that the Negro man believed to be a runaway slave has escaped from the Clark Franklin at Holmes Hole and remains at large. He was being held pending.
Yes, Mr. Early, good man. You have never been to sea.
Order, order.
We have not been called to order yet.
Patience, Mr. Blankenship, patience. This fellow who calls himself Randall Burns claims to be a free man.
The fellow could show no free papers or seaman certificate.
He should have no need of free papers. Once arrived in Massachusetts, no matter what his condition, when he fled our American Egypt, the land of bondage. The Supreme Judicial Court in Commonwealth versus Ames ruled
that ruling has been superseded by an act of Congress.
Enough. As Sheriff Coffin says, this Randall Burton could show neither free papers nor seaman certificate. The master of the Franklin turned him over to the customs officer at Holmes Hole, and that good officer duly sent to Boston for guidance on how to proceed. Pending notification, the fellow was held on board the Franklin,
from which he fled during the night in one of the ship's boats. The stolen boat has been recovered on West Jump, near the mouth of Lake Tashwood. It was surrounded by footprints, so we believe that he had help.
No surprise that, with all this ranting of abolitionism.
Order. Sheriff Coffin has the floor.
Thank you, sir. We believe he will try to make his way to Gayhead and thence to sea to New Bedford. Volunteers have been recruited to the search, and my deputy, Mr. Thomas Lambert, has vowed to keep searching till the man is found.
Unless someone invites him for a little refreshment.
It is my duty to remind all that present and anyone here present and assisting in a fugitive slave's escape or capture is subject to $1,000 fine and 6 months in jail.
What more do we need to prove the basic immorality of the Fugitive Slave Act? We are to be fined and jailed for doing what all Christians should consider their duty to their fellow man.
The law of the land is the law, and I am sworn to uphold it.
Thank you, sir. Call this meeting to order. Reverend Vincent has agreed to lead us in prayer and song.
Let us pray. O God, who has blessed us with the rights and obligations of free men, we are gathered here to discuss important matters of the day. We humbly ask you for the wisdom to listen attentively, understand fully, and speak temperately, for though we may disagree, nevertheless we are neighbors. Your Son, our Savior, has commanded us to love our neighbor as we love ourselves. He did not bid us to love only those who agree with us. We are urged to submit to civil authority, but we are also charged with the rights and obligations of civil authority. Grant us, therefore, the abilities required of all rulers to use their power for the good of the nation. This we ask in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. All people who on earth do dwell, all people who on earth do dwell, sing to the Lord with cheerful voice. Sing to the Lord with cheerful voice. Him serve with fear his praise forth tell. Him serve with fear his praise forth tell. Come ye before him and rejoice. Come ye before him and rejoice.
Farmers, mariners, shopkeepers, and tradesfolk of Martha's Vineyard, we meet to consider a petition to the great and general court of this Commonwealth regarding a resolution adopted on the 21st of December last by the House of Representatives of the United States of America. Shall I read the resolution? It was posted on the doors as you came in.
Read it.
Resolved that all memorials, petitions, and papers touching on the abolition of slavery, or the buying or selling or transferring of slaves in any state, territory, or district of the United States, shall be laid on the table without reading or reference or printing, and no further action whatever be had thereon. Several men of Edgartown have drafted a response urging the Honorable Senate and House of Representatives of this Commonwealth to register their objection to this resolution. They ask you, free men of the various island towns, to join them. The response is also posted on the doors, but I will ask Mr. Butler and Mr. Moose, who are among the drafters, to come up and summarize it.
The memorial repeats the words of the House resolution. When it points out that this resolution is a virtual denial of the people's right to petition for redress of grievances as guaranteed by our Constitution. Sorry, excuse me. Taking a little nap. As I understand it, Congress cannot prevent citizens from petitioning, but the Constitution does obligate our representatives to attend to those petitions.
Blankenship, I don't believe everybody heard you.
My point, sir, was that no law prevents our noble legislators from ignoring our petitions on any subject so long as they are discreet about it. Their error is to have let us know what they were about.
Congress has passed no law, sir. The House of Representatives has merely issued a declaration. No doubt, they are so barraged with frivolous memorials, petitions, and papers that they are unable to transact any other business.
Frivolous! You reason like the royalists who defended king and parliament when they ignored petitions from their American colonies.
How dare you? Both my grandfathers fought to free us from the tyranny of king and parliament. The Nortons are not royalists.
Gentlemen, I'd like to remind you that our good Sheriff Coffin is here to ensure that decorum expected of all citizens is maintained. We will have ample time for debate once Mr. Luce has completed his presentation. Mr. Luce, please continue.
Thank you. This resolution of the House of Representatives, we write, is a violation of the true intent and spirit of the first article of the Constitution of the United States, and one that destroys the rights of the people and endangers the union of the states.
And so it does. These slaveholders won't stop until...
Fred. Let us stick to the subject of the House resolution for now. It is outrageous enough without invoking the trespasses of the slave-holding states.
True. My apologies on this matter. I find it hard to control myself.
Understandable. We conclude by requesting our state legislators to protest without delay in the name of the people of the Commonwealth against such resolution and to invoke the House of Representatives of the United States to immediately rescind it.
Gentlemen, I will recognize speakers in turn. I pray all remember that we are indeed neighbors, and our Lord commands us to love each other as we love ourselves. Yes, Mr. Prescott.
What need have I or any neighbor man to petition Congress on this subject? No slaves are held here, or bought or sold either.
Good question. The very first article of our Bill of Rights declares that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. That right is absolute. To say otherwise is to abridge that right.
I do see your point, sir, but I've never been called to petition Congress about any grievance. And this matter of abolition rarely crosses my mind when I'm working at the smithy.
Thank you very much, because in our grandfather's and great-grandfather's time, king and parliament would not listen to peaceful petitions. And what was the result of it? War! Not 10 minutes ago, we were brought word that a colored man, said to be a fugitive slave, had escaped from a ship in our own home's whole harbor. Gone are the days when we could pretend that the peculiar institution was confined to the South.
If it ever was.
The southern states may have been very far away to a land-bound traveler, but a mariner, they're right next door. Haven't I been to Hawaii and even Australia on my voyage?
Is this
Besides the
fugitive thought to be dangerous?
Likely we pose more danger to him than he does to us.
No need to worry, ma'am. We'll have him in custody soon enough.
We'll see about that.
The man wants no more than to live as freely as the rest of us do.
He's a plucky fellow. With God's help, I believe he'll make it.
God help us that so many islanders who profess to be law-abiding citizens, cheer those who break the law, and to invoke the Almighty's support for such a position. Is this not blasphemy?
Our Lord Jesus ran afoul of the law from time to time.
And this is exactly the issue, sir. That the fugitive slave law enacted 40 years ago forces us to choose between being law-abiding citizens and disobeying an unjust law.
And now the Congress resolved not to hear our protest of this injustice.
If I might briefly address your meeting, I am Mrs. Lucretia Coffin Mott. Though long a resident of Philadelphia, I was raised on Nantucket, the daughter of Captain Thomas Coffin. Some of your fathers and grandfathers might have sailed with him. I believe I am third cousin once removed from your good sheriff.
Well, I don't know.
Mrs. Mott is well known for her eloquence.
The chair recognizes Mrs. Mott.
Thank you, sir. And good people of Martha's Vineyard, I rise on this occasion not to argue for abolition or the rights of women, but to bear witness to an incident that took place in Boston in the spring of this year. You yourselves must judge its relevance in this matter before you today. On the 24th of May, Mr. Anthony Burns of Boston was taken into custody while on his way home from work. In March, Mr. Burns had escaped from servitude and found freedom in Boston. Knowing that justice was unlikely to be served, prominent citizens of that city, some white, some colored, attempted to free Mr. Burns from the courthouse.
And an officer of the law was killed. This is what comes of your defiance of the law.
Blood was indeed shed, and God rest the man's soul and comfort his family. The next day, the court ruled that Mr. Burns must be returned to his former master in Virginia. On June the 2nd, Mr. Burns was escorted to Long Wharf by 2,000 troops. Some 50,000 people lined the route, many wearing black as though for a funeral procession. The streets were draped in black, flags hung upside down, which the mariners among you will recognize as a signal of distress. Mr. Burns was returned to the land of death, as he called it. Shortly thereafter was formed the Boston Anti-Manhunting League to prevent future kidnappings and defend their victims.
This is vigilantism. Where is the rule of law when mobs break into courtrooms and cause injury and even death to those sworn to uphold the law? This is what your abolitionism leads to.
This is what your fugitive slave law leads to. When the law comes adrift from justice and lawmakers refuse to receive the petitions of the citizens to whom they are accountable, what recourse do men of conscience have but to break the law?
Throughout the northern states, freeborn men and women are being kidnapped by slave catchers and bounty hunters and carried into the slave-holding South, where they are protected by no laws at all. The slave's sworn word is worth nothing. When he encounters tyranny, he has no recourse. Did we not declare and fight for our independence for exactly these reasons?
Our founding fathers never intended to make the Negro man equal to the white.
Or the woman equal to the man either. That is clear enough, and yet we profess to believe that in the eyes of God, the woman is equal to the man, and the Negro equal to the white, and that all men are created equal.
Look at me. I'm a Wampano, born of Wampano parents right here on this island. In '51, late summer it was, I went ashore in Baltimore. There I was stopped by two men. Well dressed they were, not sailors or longshoremen. They swore I was a runaway from a farm in Carolina. I showed my seaman certificate, of course, I did. They said I stole it, And I said I didn't steal it. I'm a free man of Martha's Vineyard. Then 3 of my mates, a Nantucketer, a Swede, and a fellow from the Azores, they come up and ask, what's the problem here? Just checking this fellow's papers is all, says one of them. And off they went. Now I don't go ashore unless I'm right here at home.
Truly spoken. And how many gathered here have seen a Negro man or woman on the street and at once thought slave? As you might see a person of small stature and at once think child. Let me tell you a story. Solomon Northrop was born free in the state of New York. He made the mistake of his life when he believed 2 white men who pretended to hire him for regular work in a circus. He was a fiddler, a carpenter, and a farmer. He willingly went with these men, first to New York City and then to Washington, D.C. In the capital city, he was drugged, kidnapped, and robbed of his freeman's papers. When he awakened and complained, he was beaten and put in shackles. Slavery laws ruled, and his words as a Negro man were worthless in the face of white male supremacy. When he argued about his unjust abduction, his captors treated him more cruelly. Thanks to this fugitive slave law, slave catchers and bounty hunters from hell roam the northern states at will. Do they capture only fugitives? No, indeed. Look at the law practices, and you will see that the Negro fugitive does not have a chance for justice in the courts. A commissioner who pronounces a Negro man or woman free is paid $5. On the other hand, a judge who sends a Negro man or woman back to the land of the dead is paid $10. In courtrooms, the scales of justice are weighed on one side with cash by men who know right from wrong, yet they opt to yield to the temptation of acquiring easy money.
And he did, sir, when he spun this tale and published it in a book, knowing, I am sure, how easily it would separate the impressionable from their money. Good men have noted its similarities to the sentimental screed published by Mrs. Stowe only a year before. By his own admission, he was acquainted with it.
I infer, Mr. Norton, that you are not. Anyone who has read both Mr. Northrop's 12 Years a Slave and Mrs. Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin will recognize what poppycock this accusation is.
Mr. Northrop includes many names of real people and places in his book, and real court papers too. Mrs. Stowe's famous book is fiction and does not pretend to be otherwise, yet it seems there is much truth in it.
Much diligent effort has been devoted to proving the Northrop story false. Instead, its truth has been confirmed in every detail.
Can this fellow prove that he was not an accomplice in his own kidnapping? When short of money, these free colored are known to arrange their own kidnapping and sale, then escape their owner and pocket their share of the purchase price.
I know my home, sir. This is slander of the most outrageous sort.
These abolitionist fanatics are trying to portray cruelty as the norm, not the exception. Of course, some slaveholders are cruel, as some farmers mistreat their horses and captains mistreat their sailors. Do we therefore rule that farmers cannot harness horses to do their bidding, or even that a ship's captain may not punish a sailor for disobeying an order? We do not.
Men are not beasts.
White men of stature have earned the privileges of liberty. The colored race is, as you can see, indolent and frivolous and prone to falsehood if left to their own devices. Thus, it is the Christian duty of the white man to guide the black as fathers guide their children.
And as husbands are given power over their wives, women being likewise by nature indolent and frivolous and unworthy of liberty.
It's true! Captains have absolute power over their men, and some do abuse that power. Wise captains heed the lesson of Sharon's Captain House Norris of Hope's Hold. After many months of cruel treatment, Captain Norris finally murdered his steward, a colored man, and was slain in turn by his crewman.
Colored savages, every one. Your example proves my point.
They were at sea and afraid for their own lives with no recourse to constable or court of law. What would you have done in their place, sir? Wait for this tyrannical captain to take your own life?
Word spreads about the bad ones, and quickly too. A prudent sailor knows to avoid them.
Well, slaves have no choice of manner or what labor they are put to.
And think of poor Uncle Tom in Mrs. Stowe's novel. He has a good master, but the good master loses money at cards, and so Tom must be sold to pay his master's debts, through no fault of his own. And though he deserved much better, he came under the power of a very wicked man.
Then, let the wicked men, the kidnappers, and the cruel captains be brought to justice. There is nothing to these stories, or in the Bible either, that contradicts the right of masters to own slaves, or captains to impose discipline on their crews. A God-fearing man exercises his power fairly.
And if he does not, if another man cheats me, or steals from me, or does me harm, I can take him to court, or bring my complaint to Sheriff Coffin over here. They're one of his deputies.
All your hypotheticals are worthless before the evidence of a man's own eyes. The Negro race is not disciplined enough for the freedom that white men enjoy. Thus, the white race is charged with guiding them in the path of honorable work and obedience to God's will.
Is this what the evidence of your own eyes tell you?
The evidence of my own eyes tells me some white men have not the discipline to train a dog or row a dinghy.
Those who believe so, Mr. Norton, enact laws to ensure that the Negro will never develop the faculties of a free man. Do you know it is illegal to teach a slave to read?
Some things it's a mistake to teach women.
I beg your pardon?
Well, I didn't say that I caused.
You better be careful there, brother. We may not be entitled to vote, but we have our ways of making our displeasure known.
One of my young students posed me a question, and I had no answer for her. Perhaps Mr. Norton could answer it for me.
Well, perhaps.
If colored slaves are like mules and oxen who can be harnessed and put to work with no say in the matter, where are the laws against teaching a mule or an ox to read and write?
Well, ma'am, any fool can see there is no need of such laws. I doubt not your skill and patience as a teacher, but even you could not teach an ox or a mule to read.
No, she has you there, good sir. No mule was ever whipped for daring to learn his letters, nor any man or woman fined or jailed for teaching.
In the southern states, men who consider themselves good Christians deny their slaves access to the Bible, to the very word of God. They support missions to preach the gospel to the heathen of Africa, but not to Africa's descendants on their own plantations.
Or they preach selectively. It's all urge bondsmen to be subject to their own masters in everything, to be well-pleasing, not argumentative, and never, where there is neither Greek nor Jew, circumcised or uncircumcised, barbarian, Scythian, bond nor free, but Christ is all and in all. No man can serve two masters.
What if slaves should read the words of Jesus and learn that they were equal to the white man in the eyes of the Lord? What if they should take to heart the words of our Declaration of Independence?
More bloody insurrections, that's what.
I'm sure the late King George III was warned as much.
But sir, do we not teach children to read and write and do numbers so that in time they will be able to exercise the rights and obligations of adults?
Women, however, learn to read and write and manage a household or run a business, then are denied the right to vote.
Our abolitionist neighbors have strayed from the purpose of this meeting. We are here solely to debate a petition to our state legislature in Boston, are we not? Instead, we have bogged down in arguments for and against slavery itself. These arguments are not new, and how likely is it that anyone here present does not already have an opinion on the issue?
I came only because my wife had her party. What does this have to do with us, I said. We have no slavery here, and few colored people either. This talk of kidnappings, and even now a fugitive slave is being hunted across our island, I hadn't considered this.
Stories open eyes and hearts. The men of the U.S. House of Representatives have resolved to hear no stories that might disturb their peace.
He who reads the Bible or any work of history, ancient or modern, knows that slavery is the way of the world, and it is no more ours to control than the weather. Enough of this talk. I call for a vote.
The dream to end slavery begins with the dreamer whose dreams do not die upon waking. Some believe that they are doing God's work by keeping others in thrall, and that the unalienable rights with which all men are endowed by their Creator do not apply to those of the Negro race. Even those who have by birth or God's blessing secured their freedom. Not for them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is a great dream, and one that will not die. Shall we understand it to mean that life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness for some must come denying it to others? This is the question before you. How will you answer it?
The question has been called. Have you heard enough? Are you ready to vote?
I'm not ready to vote.
Nor am I! I cast my vote against voting. I mean against voting sooner rather than later.
So be it. The discussion will go on.
I am losing my patience with all this foolishness.
What word of our fugitive, Bishop?
What was that?
The fugitive from the Franklin. Has there been any news?
If there had been, the Assembly would know it. Deputy Lambert will surely be along shortly to report that the fugitive is in our custody.
In the northern states, Negroes become educators and ministers, lawyers and doctors. They manage businesses as ably as any white man. In the southern states, even the skills of reading and writing are denied.
And why is that? So the slaveholders will not have to confront the evidence of their own eyes, that the convictions that form the foundation of their world are flawed. that those they use and abuse like beasts might be their equal and even superiors in intelligence.
The relation is closer than that, sir. Many slaves are the literal sons and daughters of their masters, got on the unwilling bodies of slave women. Indeed, the slave woman has the very worst of it. She must acquiesce to the demands of her master or his sons, and what happens when a child is born? The mistress is struck by the child's resemblance to her own children, but can she vent her rage at her husband? She cannot. So the child must be taken from its mother and sold away, and the mother, bereft, if not sold herself, must suffer the consequences of the mistress's jealousy and anger.
Solomon Northrop was born into slavery and denied from birth every advantage that cultivates the senses or the mind. How could his adult condition be anything but degraded? But his misfortune taught him a harder lesson. In the land of bondage, he was a freeborn Negro. He was gradually enslaved by his unfortunate circumstances, where any sign of free will might be punished with terrible whippings or worse. He acted the part assigned to him. When his guard dropped, as it did more than once, the result was always dire and could be fatal. Small wonder then that for those born in bondage, the hope of heaven after death is their only consolation. As for some, the hope of heaven after death becomes the dream of freedom in the North. Listen to the songs.
To be free, the slave must flee all the way to Canada.
No one is born a slave or a slaveholder. As a boy, I was sent to serve my master's kin in Baltimore. And there my new mistress was a woman of the kindest heart and the finest feelings. She had never had a slave under her control previously to myself, and prior to that, to her marriage, she had been dependent upon her own industry for her living. She was by trade a weaver, and by constant application to her business, she had been in a good part preserved from the blighting and dehumanizing effect of slavery. I was utterly astonished at her goodness. I scarcely knew how to behave around her. She taught me my letters and how to spell my first words. Then her husband found out and forbade her to teach me anymore. It is unlawful as well as unsafe to teach a slave to read, he said. If you teach that nigger, it was me he meant, how to read, there would be no keeping him. It would forever unfit him to be a slave. He spoke the truth. This is why it is unlawful to teach a slave to read or for a slave to learn, but there is no such law against teaching horses or oxen. In that moment, I became determined to learn to read and to write, and to find my way to freedom in the North.
How did the kindness of your mistress awaken this dream in you?
She took entirely to heart her husband's warning. Slavery proved to be as injurious to her as it was to me. Where, before, I was a fellow human being in her eyes, now I was only a slave. Nothing seemed to make her more angry than to see me with a newspaper. She seemed to think that here lay the danger. I had had her rush at me with a face full of fury and snatch a newspaper from me in a manner that revealed her total apprehension.
And now you go about the country inflaming the passions of impressionable ladies and not a few gentlemen, and urging them to violate the laws of the country? Surely the good woman's apprehension was justified.
I want this bone mine, and it will stay on freedom. I want this bone with my mind, and it will stay on freedom. Oh, this bone with my mind, and it will stay on freedom. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Hate your neighbor in your mind when it is stay on freedom. You cannot hate your neighbor in your mind when it is stay on freedom. You cannot hate your neighbor in your mind when it is stay on freedom. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Hallelujah.
Sir.
I am saying, madam, that there is no need to educate anyone above their station. My liveryman and my field hands have no need of Hobbes, or Locke, Kant, or Rousseau.
Does Mr. Naughton perhaps fear that his field hands might understand those philosophers better than himself?
But sir, there is so much more to read than the works of the great philosophers.
Oh, now I understand. You are of the school that believes women and slaves should learn only as much as makes them more useful to their masters, white men, such as yourself.
I might remind the good gentleman that the teachings of our Savior are available to anyone who can read them. Loath as I am to admit it, some ministers of my own denomination preach a distorted gospel to slaves who cannot read for themselves.
It is true, I did not appreciate the full beauty and wisdom of the Gospels until I could read them myself, with the good Reverend's guidance, of course. But thanks to Mr. Douglas's words, I came to understand how precious freedom is, because he showed me so vividly the lack of it. I have learned some of it by heart, if only I can remember it now. Here he is a slave, a young man, watching ships on the Chesapeake Bay. You are loosed from your moorings and are free. I am fast in my chains and am a slave. You move merrily before the gentle gale, and I sadly before the bloody whip. You are freedom's swift-winged angels that fly round the world. I am confined in bands of iron. Oh, that I were free. Oh, that I were on one of your gallant decks and under your protecting wing. Alas, betwixt me and you, the turbid waters roll. Go on, go on. Oh, that I could also go. Could I but swim? If I could fly? Oh, why was I born a man, of whom to make a brute? The glad ship is gone. She hides in the dim distance. I am left in the hottest hell of unending slavery. Oh God, save me. God, deliver me. Let me be free.
Well said, Mrs.
Prescott. Prescott, sir. I am Emily Prescott of Tisbury. This is my husband, Jeremiah. I keep a small school in our home. I have been reading your narrative to my older pupils.
Well done indeed. God answered my prayer, gave me the hope and the strength and the good fortune to flee to bondage. Though it was not on a ship on the sea that delivered me to freedom, but instead a train on the land.
Had you gone aboard ship, you might have found that the wings of freedom's swift-winged angels do not extend their protection to all, as the master of the Franklin turned your brother in to claim the bounty.
To obey the law as any citizen should.
An unjust law whose enforcement has made a mockery of the Constitution.
Whaling voyages go longer.
3 years, no longer 3 years, but 5 or 6 or 8. It is said that some whaling ships have transported slaves from Africa in defiance of the law, or between ports in this hemisphere, all to make up for the scarcity of whales.
May the wings of angels protect those who flee by land.
Angels, this is blasphemy. Those who aid this fugitive's escape are criminals.
The fugitive will be caught. Have no fear. I'm sure he'll be here soon.
Word we will surely have, but it may take the good sheriff by surprise when he comes.
Black Nance, is this woman to be allowed the floor? She's not but a pauper, and a disreputable one at that. Her daughter is no stranger to the county jail.
It is somewhat irregular.
I was a slave once. At the age of 7, I was sold to Mr. Allen's grandfather. I recall it well. Your black Nance forgets nothing.
Alone among all in this room, Nancy Michael has known slavery as a slave. This alone should confer upon her the right to address a meeting called to consider this very issue.
Must I remind the gentleman that this meeting was not called to debate abolitionism, but to consider petitioning our state legislators about a particular constitutional question.
A particular constitutional question raised by this peculiar institution. I dare say King Solomon himself would rule that the two issues cannot be sundered.
King Solomon, being wise, would let Black Nance speak. Misfortune dogs those who refuse to hear her or heed her words.
I see no harm in it. Black Nance's grandson, William Martin, is held in high regard by Vineyard seamen. You may have your say.
I have had enough of this foolishness. It seems our ordinary, sober islanders have been infected with the abolitionism that has laid waste to Nantucket. Shall we go?
Freedom's no easy thing. My life has been hard, and my daughter Rebecca's even harder. She's not well at all. But her son William, some of you know him, William Martin, a seaman by trade.
I sailed with him once, and would do so again.
As would I. He speaks of you with much respect. No, with reverence. Why, once we were,
Don't stop there.
All right.
Speak, sir.
All right. It's nothing, ma'am, or not much, but once on board ship, the sailors were talking the way sailors do when no officers or ladies are present. And one of them said, Black Nance is nothing but a charlatan with her charms and potions. And William, passing by, he was boat steerer at the time on that voyage, fixes the fellow with a stare that could turn a man to stone, and said, "Who speaks ill of my dear grandmother speaks ill of me, and that's a charlatan. Would you have me repeat your words to her?" The fellow backed off right quick and said he meant no harm.
Oh, I know what they say of me in the street and on board ship, and I dare say even in this room. But I know, your Black Nancy knows, anyone who scorns me in public then comes to my house and they ask their questions about how long will the voyage last? Will there be a late frost? Is this one a suitable husband for my daughter? And you ask my advice and my blessing. Well, I will tell you this. Although you didn't ask, my grandson William went to whaling as a boy, and who is at sea today? He will be a master of a ship one day. The master of 3 ships. I'll not live to see it, but it will come to pass.
It will indeed come to pass, and most of you gathered here will live to see it.
You must have a chair to sit in, not the hard floor.
These old bones have suffered harder.
Oh, there you are, ma'am.
Lord does work in miracles. Ask and it shall be given you. Seek and ye shall find. Knock and it shall be opened unto you.
And yet, by order of Congress, we knock and our knocking is not heard because our federal legislators have sworn not to hear it. No good can come of this.
From the round top of your ship of state, dark and threatening clouds may be seen. Heavy billows like mountains in the distance disclose to the leeward hued forms of flinty rocks. That boat drawn, that chain broken, and all is lost. Cling to its day, cling to it and to its principles, with the grasp of a storm-tossed mariner to a spear at midnight. Standing there, I identify with the American bondman, making his wrongs mine. I do not hesitate to declare with all my soul that the character and conduct of this nation never looked blacker to me than on this 4th of July.
That speech is famous. I can speak a little bit of it. The Declaration of Independence is the ring bolt to the chain of your nation's destiny. So indeed, I regard it. The principles contained in that instrument are saving principles. Stand by those principles. Be true to them on all occasions, in all places, against all foes, and whatever cost. That means all men, even the colored, should have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Oh no, we're discovered.
What have we here? Boys sometimes stow away on board ships seeking adventure. This is the first time I've heard of them stowing away at a meeting.
Don't be afraid. No harm will come to you.
Oh, ma'am, you don't know my master.
It was all my idea. It's my fault.
Why, it's my own prudence. I'm afraid I must take some responsibility for this. We've been studying Mr. Douglas's speech. What an extraordinary example of rhetoric it is. And Prudence was much taken with it. I told her that our father and I were coming to this meeting.
It's not your fault, Mama. It was my idea to come. And I got to hear Mr. Douglas himself. I will never forget it.
Why, you little sassy witch. Is this how you repay me for taking you into my household when you were an orphan? Shirking your duties to sneak away to this meeting of your betters?
Please, sir. It was my fault, truly. I told Henrietta that this meeting was going to be historic.
Oh dear, I used exactly that word.
And it is. We heard Mr. Douglas and Mrs. Mott, and she is famous too. She speaks against slavery and for the rights of women. I will remember this forever.
Don't be mad at Miss Prudence. I wanted to come, even if I was scared. See, she's been learning to recite parts of Mr. Douglas's speech, so she practices on me. It makes my skin tingle all up and down. So I asked, would she teach me my letters so I can read it too?
What devil has gotten into you? It's up to me to say if you learn your letters.
Did you not hear the words of Frederick Douglass of how learning to read and write opened his eyes to the wide world and the idea of freedom?
This is exactly what the shareholders fear, that those who would teach a slave to read can be thrown in jail, and slaves who dare to read can be punished with monstrous whippings and even with death. We in the free states must do better than this.
Henrietta isn't a slave. She's my friend.
Well said, my girl, and a little child shall lead them. One night I dreamed I was in slavery. About 1850 was the time. Sorrow was the only sign. Nothing around to ease my mind. Out of the night appeared a lady leading a distant pilgrim band. First mate, she held point in her hand. Make room aboard for this young woman singing, come on up, child. I've got a lifeline, come on up to this train of mine. Come on up, I got a lifeline, come on up to this train of mine. She said her name was Harriet Tubman, and she drove for the Underground Railroad.
The wolf also shall dwell with the lamb, and the leopard shall lie down with the kid, and the calf and the young lion, and the fatling together, and a little child shall lead them.
It is up to us to make it so. In the name of our Creator and of the Son He sent to deliver all men from bondage.
Let the man through. He brings news.
What news? What have you done with the fellow?
Since this fugitive made off with the Franklin's boat and fled, I've not slept a wink nor eaten more than my saddlebags can hold.
The boat was recovered, was it not?
It was recovered.
Then why chase the poor fellow if the Franklin has its boat back?
Because this fugitive's master doesn't have his property back.
By Massachusetts law, once a slave sets foot on our soil is no man's property.
The nation's laws say otherwise. Deputy, tell the story.
Well, it was hard going at first. No one had seen the fellow, or they thought they had, but they had given conflicting accounts of the encounter and whether he was accompanied and where he was headed. I surmised he was headed up island toward the Indian lands.
The man's more clever than some give him credit for.
So that's where I went, stopping to ask everyone I saw what they'd seen. At last, near Menifee, a boy told me he'd seen a colored man run into the swamp and not come out again. Of course, I followed where he pointed. Soon my horse was balking at the slippery footing and shying at every noise. This was unusual, you see, because he's usually the steadiest of mounts. It's all tricks of the light and wind, I told him. But then I saw deer moving through the trees and heard gulls flying overhead. Two women came toward me, each carrying a basket, both with shawls, concealing their hair and their features. The next thing I knew, my horse was grazing at the edge of the swamp, and the sun, which had been high in the sky, was just above the horizon. So the reins must have slipped from my hands.
So what are you saying?
Those women must have bewitched her.
I searched all around, and I finally found the wheel tracks of a wagon, and hoof prints and footprints, many of them, some large and some small.
Or perhaps he carried something stronger than water in his flight.
And where did they leave? Where is the fugitive?
Well, the footprints vanished. Wherever they belonged to must have climbed into the wagon.
A brilliant deduction.
So I followed the wagon tracks up to the road, but there they disappeared. The ground was hard, you see, and the wind was blowing and more traffic had passed, and I had no way of knowing which way.
No way of knowing. Where would the wagon be found if not for the Indian lands?
Mr. Burton is bound for New Bedford, where no bounty hunter will find him. Was our good deputy sheriff bewitched, or was he only deceived by appearances? He says he saw two women, but what if one was no more a girl or boy? Is this child a boy because she puts on a boy's clothes?
When Randall Burton returns to Martha's Vineyard, and return he will, to thank those who helped him on his way, often at great risk to themselves, it will be as a free man, whose freedom none will question, because then all men of this country will be free.
And the women, will they be free? Will we be free as well?
We will be free, but it will take longer. How old are you now, child?
I turned 11 in June.
Then the gods and ancestors willing, you may someday cast a ballot yourself. Your daughters and granddaughters surely will.
Oh, our word is falling with your mind, and it will say, "Set our freedom." It's falling with your mind, and it will say, "Set our freedom." It's falling with your mind, and it will say, "Set our freedom." Hallelujah, hallelujah,
This day, the past has sung its stories. The past is always singing. But this day, you have listened. And even now, you are braiding these stories into your own. They are your stories to tell, to take into the future. These children, Prudence and Henrietta, will carry the story to distant places and times yet to be. As Mrs. Mott and Mr. Douglas do today. Listen. Can you hear them? We sing to the future, and the future sings to us, if we dare to listen. Be brave. Listen. We owe it to those who have come before us. Will we dare to create the future? Will we make our stories heard?
The Congress refuses to hear our stories. The stories of Frederick Douglass and Solomon Northrop, Randall Burton and Anthony Burns, and millions more who cannot speak. We must open their ears. We must open their minds.
What say you? Are you ready to vote on this petition to our state legislator?
Yes, we're ready.
Shall I read the warrant again?
Hell no! We know what's there.
The proposed memorial calls the resolution of the U.S. House of Representatives to hear no petitions concerning slavery or the abolition of slavery, a violation of the true intent and spirit of the first article of the Constitution of the United States. It asks our state legislators to protest this resolution in the name of all the people of this Commonwealth. All in support of this memorial, please say aye. Aye! And in opposition, please say nay.
No!
The ayes clearly carry the day.